Tonight we have a selection of horror stories for you. Make a warm drink, get comfy and enjoy. Story 1: The Catacombs.
In the depths beneath Paris, where centuries of history lie dormant, a classified military operation was about to uncover something that should have remained buried forever. The air was different down there, heavy with an electromagnetic charge that made our equipment malfunction. That's when Peter spotted the first anomaly, markings on the walls that definitely weren't French, weren't even human. We pushed deeper, following a network of tunnels that shouldn't have existed on any map. The architecture began to shift from medieval to something else entirely. Smooth, black surfaces with pulsing lines of unknown origin. That's when we found them, the bodies. Thousands of them preserved perfectly, some looking centuries old, others much older, some human, and some definitely not. The discovery of the temple changed everything. Massive doors covered in symbols that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. Rodriguez, our tech specialist, said the metal wasn't from Earth. None of this was. Jenkins was the first to lose it. He started talking about whispers, about eyes in the darkness. We didn't believe him until we found the tombs. Hundreds of them, arranged in concentric circles around a central altar. Martinez made the mistake of touching one. The screaming. God, the screaming. The lids began to open, one by one. What emerged? They weren't human, weren't anything we had words for, twisted and contoured. Lights where their eyes should have been and about 8 foot tall. They got into our heads and showed us things. Impossible things, horrible things, which made us lose sense of reality. I watched them rip my team apart one by one, not just physically but mentally. Thompson clawed his own face off. Williams jumped into a bottomless pit, laughing the whole way down. Garcia just stood there, crying tears of blood until his heart stopped. I ran as those things pursued me through the darkness. The last thing I saw before they ripped my eyes out was their true form. The last thing I tasted before they pulled my tongue out was my own terror. They let me live. They wanted me to deliver a message. Those ancient beings, those patient predators, they've been waiting. The seal is broken now. They're awake and they're hungry. They whispered to me that humanity had its chance, its time to rule the surface. Soon, they'll rise from their underground temple. The nuclear weapons we were sent to find, they would have been a mercy compared to what's coming. Listen closely at night. You might hear them stirring beneath the streets of Paris, preparing. They're coming. And this time there won't be any ancient civilization to stop them.
Story 2: The Blackwood Asylum.
On October 24th, 2019, a horror documentary crew headed on a journey like no other to explore an abandoned mental asylum. They were excited to see if they could uncover anything behind all the rumors. The cameras were rolling as they made their way through the rusty gates of Blackwood Asylum. A crew member called Sarah was excited as she adjusted her boom mic. "Guys, this is going to be epic for our documentary," she said. If only they knew what awaited them behind those weathered walls. The building loomed before them, its broken windows like hollow eyes watching their every move. Tom, the cameraman, captured the crumbling facade while a guy named Jake narrated the asylum's history. It had closed in 1963 after numerous patient deaths. Blackwood Asylum has remained abandoned for over half a century, until now. The first sign something was wrong came when their equipment started malfunctioning. Static interference, batteries draining inexplicably fast. But they pressed on, like the foolish thrill-seekers they were. That's when you heard it. The sound of bare feet slapping against wet tile, echoing through empty corridors. Sarah spotted it first. Through Tom's viewfinder, a figure darted past, impossibly thin, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. But that was just the beginning. The deeper they ventured, the more their grasp on reality seemed to slip. The walls seemed to breathe. Shadows moved against the laws of physics. They found patient records scattered across the floor, describing treatments that would make your stomachs turn. Their bodies twisted and deformed, faces stretched into permanent screams. They moved like broken puppets, crawling across walls and ceilings. One by one, they so obviously lost themselves. Sarah started speaking in multiple voices, having conversations with people who weren't there. Mike, the sound guy, gouged out his own eyes, claiming they were showing him things he couldn't bear to see. Jake watched helplessly as his crew was torn apart, both mentally and physically. Their screams still echo in anyone who watches nightmares. Jake ran, but the asylum wouldn't let him leave. The last thing you see on the video was those creatures surrounding him, their hollow eyes reflecting terror, and then the camera goes black. The footage was discovered years later, mysteriously uploaded to a YouTube channel called Blackwood Archives. The video description simply read, "Found footage from the Marshall Documentary Crew 2019. Who's next?" Now, there are rumors of another crew planning to investigate, drawn in by the crew's recorded descent into madness. They don't understand. The asylum isn't just haunted. It's hungry, and it's waiting for its next visitors. So if you ever stumble across those videos, remember this: some places are abandoned for a reason. And Blackwood Asylum, it's not abandoned at all. It's very much alive, collecting souls, one curious filmmaker at a time.
Story 3. Sleep Talking.
My wife and I moved into our new apartment just a few months ago. Before this, we lived in a large cottage overlooking a beautiful lake. It was my wife's dream home for the 3 years we lived there. We didn't want to leave, but it was a necessary step for us. You see, Jessica and I used to live down south. Everything was going well for a while, but my law firm decided to promote me out of the blue. It was unexpected, but I couldn't have been more grateful. Unfortunately, the job entailed transferring to another one of our many branch locations. The one in question was in New England. We spoke long and hard on the matter, but eventually, Jess agreed to the move. It's important to note that the dollar doesn't stretch as far up north as it does down south. It's also harder to find employment. That's why we were downgrading our living space. Until Jess could find another job, we would have to suffer. At least that's the way she looked at it. Tensions were high the first few weeks after the move. I could tell Jess was irritable. She missed our old house, our old friends, and working a steady job. She had nothing to do with all of her free time, so she was bored out of her skull. This led to many fights. For a while, it seemed like we would never settle in. About a month after the move, things started looking up. Jess found temporary work as a part-time editor at the local TV station. She loved the work and couldn't have been happier with her co-workers. I couldn't have been happier for her. Everything seemed to be fine for a while. Not perfect, but fine. This was when the sleep talking began. It was to be expected, and honestly, I'm surprised it didn't start up sooner. You see, my wife is a restless sleeper whenever there's a big change in her life, good or bad. It happened when we got married, when we moved into our first home, and when she had the miscarriage. I'll touch more on that later. Jess knows she sleep talks because I used to bring it up from time to time. I would laugh each morning, recalling the weird things she said the night before. This always made her uncomfortable. She seemed to be embarrassed by it. That's why, after her first night of sleep talking in our new apartment, I didn't say anything. The sleep talking went on for a couple of weeks. It was at this time that Jess's temp job at the TV station came to an end. Without a job to keep her mind off of things, her nightly outbursts became much worse. She began screaming at odd times during the night, in which I would be forced to calm her down. One night, her screams turned into tears. As she was crying, she said something I'll never forget. "I wish you were dead." I knew my wife was asleep, but as I sat there by her side, calming her the best I could, I felt the need to press the matter. "You wish who were dead, hon?" To my surprise, she responded, "You." This caught me off guard. It's a strange thing to want your husband dead, and even stranger while you're asleep. "Why?" I asked. "You're ruining my life." Those 4 words cut deep. Whether they were meant or merely the product of a tired mind, they were the kind of words that demanded self-reflection. I wondered for a moment if I truly was ruining her life, or at least if I were to blame for her night terrors. My wife remained silent for the rest of the night. I know this because I stayed up. Contemplation and worry kept me from a good night's rest. I didn't believe for a second that my wife really wanted me dead, but her late-night antics were certainly a cause for concern. Between the screaming episodes and the morbid dialogue, this was the worst her condition had ever been. The next morning, I came pretty damn close to telling her about what had happened, but I kept thinking about how she'd react and what she'd say. It was too much. I didn't want to burden her any more than I already had, especially after she'd just been laid off. I also didn't want to have another fight. In light of this, I kept my mouth shut. The following night, the screams were gone. This was a comfort, but a fleeting one. Out of the blue, just as I was about to shut my eyes and call it a night, the sleep talking commenced once again. Sometimes I think about how I'd do it. I chalked this statement up to pure dream-induced nonsense, but then she continued, "While you're asleep in bed, I'll get up and go to the kitchen." I didn't know what she was talking about, but as she kept speaking, it dawned on me. There were some moments of inaudible gibberish, but from the bits and pieces that were fluent, I could paint a pretty good picture of what she was describing. I reach into, grab knife, over and over again. Blood oozing off the bed. Can't ruin my life anymore.
My wife was describing her plan to off me. As deeply unsettling as this was, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. It was just a dream, after all, nothing more. I can't say I haven't done some weird things in my own dreams, things I would never do in real life. Jess was mad at me over the move, and she was working out her frustrations while she slept. At least that's what I convinced myself. The sleep talking continued for a few weeks. I hoped that Jess's midnight venting sessions were doing her some good, but without a degree in psychology, I couldn't be certain. All I could do was listen to her ramble about offing me each night and wait for her condition to run its course. The longest her sleep talking had ever lasted was a month, so it was safe to say it would be over soon. A month passed, then 2. Jess didn't let up. Every night, it was the same routine. Either incoherent nonsense or babblings about how she'd like to hurt me. It was getting old, but one night changed everything. As my wife slept, she uttered some words that tore right through my heart. "I lost my baby because of you." My emotions swirled about and formed a sour concoction that rested in the pit of my stomach. This time I had to know what she meant. "What do you mean, hun?" There was a brief moment of silence, but eventually, Jess offered me an answer. There was some more gibberish mixed in, but she was able to get her point across. "You made me want kids. You put life in me. Now I'm alone." This struck a nerve and caused a few tears to roll down my cheeks. It was my idea to have a kid. Jess never wanted children, but she made herself want them for me. That's why, after the miscarriage, I was surprised to find her absolutely devastated. I had no clue how much she'd warmed up to the idea of having a baby. My tears were interrupted by more sleep talking, of the worst variety. "I will kill you, I promise." That was the last thing she said all night. It's been roughly a week since my wife made that promise. As disturbing as that threat was, I could have easily brushed it off with the rest, assuming it too was the product of stress and was nothing for me to worry about. Unfortunately, I can't stop worrying about it. Jess is scaring the crap out of me. I'm now taking short naps and sleeping with one eye open, and it's all because of one thing. Now she's sleepwalking.
Story 4. Catnap.
Let me tell you about the most terrifying toy that ever existed, Catnap. What seemed like an innocent plush companion turned out to be something far more sinister. It all began at the Poppy Playtime Factory, where Catnap was supposedly just another prototype among the cheerful toys being developed. But there was something different about this one. While other toys spread joy, Catnap harbored a darkness within. One night, the factory's security cameras captured something horrifying. All the smiling toys, the ones meant to bring happiness to children, were being destroyed one by one. The culprit? Everyone thought it was the prototype, but here's the twist. Catnap had orchestrated everything, framing its own destruction while plotting its escape. Under the cover of darkness, Catnap fled the factory. Its first victims were an unsuspecting couple parked on a lonely road. They never stood a chance. What happened in that car? Well, let's just say there wasn't much left to find. But that was just the beginning. Something changed in Catnap that night. Its form twisted and morphed into something nightmarish. Darker, bigger, more grotesque. The once cute plush toy became a monster that terrorized everyone in its path. The body count grew with each passing hour. The police finally confronted Catnap in an intense standoff. It took everything they had: special forces, heavy artillery, the works. Finally, they managed to capture the creature, or so they thought. They locked it in the highest security cell they had, but the next morning the cell was empty. No signs of escape, no broken bars, nothing. Catnap had simply vanished. The only evidence of its existence was a strange note found next to a stuffed teddy bear. It read, "Happiness isn't something you put inside you, it's already there. Sometimes you just need someone to help you find it." To this day, no one knows where Catnap went, but parents started noticing their kids disappearing and something odd about their teddies. Sometimes late at night, they could swear they saw them, smiling differently. And if you listen carefully in the dark, you might hear a soft purring sound getting closer and closer. Just remember, not all toys are what they seem. And Catnap, well, it might just be out there looking for someone else to help find their happiness.
Story 5. Sarah.
Let me tell you about something that happened on a night just like this. Sarah was only 8 when she first heard the scratching. You know that sound, like fingernails on wood, but slower, more deliberate. At first, she thought it was just the old maple tree outside her bedroom window. But trees don't whisper your name. The house was different that night. The shadows seemed longer, darker, as if they were reaching for something. Sarah's parents had gone to bed hours ago, leaving her alone with the storm and whatever was making those sounds. The scratching grew louder, moving from her window to her closet door. Sarah pulled her blanket tight, watching as the door slowly began to creak open. That's when she saw it, a thing that shouldn't exist. Its body was twisted, bent at impossible angles, with skin that looked like melted wax. But its eyes? Oh, its eyes were the worst part. They weren't empty like you'd expect. They were full of purpose, full of horror and evil. It spoke to her, not with its mouth, if you could call that torn gap a mouth, but inside her head. Such a pretty vessel, it whispered. So much room to grow inside. Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. The thing slithered closer, leaving a trail of something dark and wet on her bedroom floor. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings. Each step brought with it a sound like breaking bones. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of rot and something sweeter, like overripe fruit. Sarah felt her body growing numb, starting from her toes and creeping upward. The creature reached out with fingers too long and too thin, almost touching her face. "Just a little closer," it wheezed. "Just a little more room to squeeze in." But Sarah wasn't as helpless as it thought. Just as its cold fingers brushed her cheek, she reached for the cross her grandmother had given her, hanging above her bed. The creature recoiled as if burned, its form rippling like disturbed water. "Clever girl," it hissed, backing away. "But I can wait. I'm so good at waiting." When Sarah's parents checked on her the next morning, they found her sleeping peacefully. But there was something different about her smile, something not quite right. And sometimes when she looks in the mirror, her reflection takes just a moment too long to match her movements. Because the thing about possession? Sometimes it's patient enough to take its time and takes you little by little. They say on rainy nights you can still hear it scratching, waiting for its chance to finish what it started. And Sarah? Well, she's still fighting. At least, we hope she is.
Story 6, Mr. Smile.
It was in early November of 1997 that a series of very strange sessions led a child psychologist in Maine to contact the authorities. It began when a patient of his began to tell him about one of their friends. This friend was imaginary as far as both the psychiatrist and the boy's parents were concerned. He called his friend Mr. Smile and would talk about him at great length during some sessions. The boy called him Mr. Smile both because he would always be smiling and because when he was around, the boy said everything felt happy. He said that there was a feeling of everything being okay. The boy in question was being treated for serious issues to do with anger and depression, but when Mr. Smile was around, and he said that all the anger and the sadness seemed to just disappear. He said that Mr. Smile wouldn't speak, but rather just stand there at the foot of his bed. He smelled like candy floss, and just by being there, he made the boy feel calm and safe. The psychiatrist assumed this imaginary friend was some sort of coping mechanism the boy had developed to deal with the problems at home that had led to his violent temper, and thought nothing much of it. Until another patient, a girl of about 9 years old, also began talking about her imaginary friend, Mr. Smile. And then a boy of 7, and then a boy of 12, and then a girl of 11. All in all, close to 15 separate patients all began to talk to him about Mr. Smile. The first few he'd put down to coincidence. After all, many children have imaginary friends, and the name and description of Mr. Smile were just generic enough that it didn't concern him too much at first. But as more and more of his patients told him about Mr. Smile, he began to grow concerned. He asked for more details. Every single one of them described him the same way, using the exact same words. Now there was no way that all of these children could be in contact with each other. 5 of them, for instance, were currently being homeschooled, and according to their parents when he spoke to them, never really even left the house, except when it was to accompany them on shopping trips and the like. There was no way that every single one of these kids could have rehearsed or prepared their statements together, which led him to a deeply disturbing conclusion. He spoke privately with each of the children's parents one at a time. He avoided disclosing too much information, but told them that something troubling had cropped up in multiple sessions with various patients and that he believed that there was a chance their child was at risk. He asked for their permission to discuss matters with the authorities, and the parents gave their consent, provided they were kept in the loop as to what was going on. And so, over the course of the next week, the police came and talked to the children about their friend. Because by this point the psychiatrist, the parents, and the police were all convinced that Mr. Smile was quite real and quite dangerous. The authorities had checked to make sure there were no known predators living in the area, which they had confirmed was not the case. But it was quite clear that whoever this Mr. Smile was, he was a real person who had been sneaking into the homes of these children at night. None of the children claimed to know how he got in. They said they would just wake up and he'd be there at the foot of their bed. Sometimes they said he would be singing something, but not in English. It sounded like a lullaby, they said. It made them feel safe. Finally, the children were asked to draw Mr. Smile, as they couldn't put into words how he looked. Each and every one of the children picked up a red crayon and proceeded to color in the entire page until it was just a rectangle of red. When asked about this, they insisted that they had drawn Mr. Smile. When asked where his head, arms, and legs were, they would insist that they had drawn those. They claimed that they had drawn a perfect picture of the man at the foot of their bed, and when they were told that they had simply colored in the page and not drawn anything at all, they became deeply angry, feeling that they were being accused of lying and insisting that what they had drawn was a picture of the man they had seen. Acting more on a hunch than anything else, the psychiatrist decided to show one of the colored in rectangles to the various children and ask them what it was. Each and every one of them, with no knowledge of what the picture was supposed to be or who had drawn it, and with no knowledge that the other children that had been spoken to about this subject even existed, replied that it was a picture of Mr. Smile. Cameras were placed in the children's rooms so that they could be monitored. Many of the parents simply stopped sleeping altogether. At no point did anyone enter or exit the bedrooms. No sounds were heard over the baby monitors. There was no sign of Mr. Smile. After almost 2 weeks of this, many of them began to doubt that Mr. Smile had ever existed. Other psychiatrists since have put the whole thing down to some strange shared delusion that, while it couldn't be explained yet, did not have any basis in reality. Some suggested that maybe this whole Mr. Smile thing had its basis in a TV show or film that the children had all watched, leading them all to dream up something similar. Then one of the boys went missing. The camera in his room had gone dead at around 2 in the morning. His mother had run to check in on him only to find his room empty. It had literally taken her less than a minute to run to his room. There was no possible way for him to leave or be taken.
But he was gone.
She said there was a smell like cotton candy in the room. The search for the boy turned up nothing. No one had seen anything strange or unusual
Around the home before or during the disappearance.
and no trace of him was ever found. It was less than a week later that one of the girls who had spoken of Mr. Smile vanished as well. Then another of the boys. One by one, each of them began to disappear until only 4 remained. The 4 remaining children began to talk about how Mr. Smile and his friends were going to take them away soon. When asked about these friends, they talked about how Mr. Smile lived with the other smiling men in the happy place and that he would take them there soon. They said that there were lots of people there already, and that in the happy place everything was beautiful. They said that they knew about it because Mr. Smile talked to them in their heads because he couldn't talk like other people did, and that he would show them pictures in their heads of the place they were going. Things began to get increasingly disturbing. After a few weeks, the children began complaining of headaches and nausea. Their schools reported that they had begun to suffer hallucinations, and 2 of them started complaining that they didn't like the place that Mr. Smile was showing them anymore. One began screaming for half an hour, acting as if they were having a fit and screaming for the colors to stop. That the colors were horrible, and that they needed them to go away. One of the children claimed that Mr. Smile was talking to them in their head all the time now and was telling them things. Terrible things, but that they couldn't talk about it. That they mustn't, because then their parents would know about the terrible things too. The contents of the book are known only to him and the authorities, but whenever anyone involved has been asked about it, they just get really quiet and quickly find an excuse to change the subject. The children stopped sleeping. Footage from the security cameras showed them sitting bolt upright, their eyes unblinking, just staring at the wall without moving or making a sound. Sedatives did nothing. One of the girls began cutting strange circular marks into her skin, while 2 of the boys ceased communicating in English altogether. By the start of 1999, all 4 of the children had vanished into thin air. There was no trace of who took them. No suspects have ever been found either. All 4 of them appeared to simply vanish into thin air, much like the others, all of whom also remain missing, their disappearances unexplained.
Story 7. Dead Bart.
Do you know how Fox has a weird way of counting Simpsons episodes? They refuse to count a couple of them, making the number of episodes inconsistent. The reason for this is a lost episode from season 1. Finding details about this missing episode is difficult. No one who was working on the show at the time likes to talk about it. From what has been pieced together, the lost episode was written entirely by Matt Groening. During the production of the first season, Matt started to act strangely. He was very quiet and he seemed nervous and morbid. Mentioning this to anyone who was present results in them getting very angry and forbidding you to ever mention it to Matt. The episode's production number was 7G44, and the title was Dead Bart. In addition to getting angry, asking anyone who was on the show about this will cause them to do everything they can to stop you from directly communicating with Matt Groening. At a fan event, I managed to follow him after he spoke to the crowd and eventually had a chance to talk to him alone as he was leaving the building. He didn't seem upset that I had followed him, probably expected a typical encounter with an obsessive fan. When I mentioned the lost episode, though, all color drained from his face, and he started trembling. When I asked him if he could tell me any details, he sounded like he was on the verge of tears. He grabbed a piece of paper, wrote something on it, and handed it to me. He begged me never to mention the episode again. The piece of paper had a website address on it. I would rather not say what it was for reasons you'll see in a second. I entered the address into my browser, and I came to a site that was completely black, except for a line of yellow text, a download link. I clicked on it, and a file started downloading. Once the file was downloaded, my computer went crazy. It was the worst virus I had ever seen. System Restore didn't work. The entire computer had to be rebooted. Before doing this, though, I copied the file onto a CD. I tried to open it on my now empty computer, and as I suspected, there was an episode of The Simpsons on it. The episode started off like any other episode, but had very poor quality animation. If you've seen the original animation for Some Enchanted Evening, it was similar but less stable. The first act was fairly normal, but the way the characters acted was a little off. Homer seemed angrier, Marge seemed depressed, Lisa seemed anxious, and Bart seemed to have genuine anger and hatred for his parents. The episode was about the Simpsons going on a plane trip. Near the end of the first act, the plane was taking off. Bart was fooling around, as you'd expect. However, as the plane was about 50 feet off the ground, Bart broke a window on the plane and was sucked out. At the beginning of the series, Matt had an idea that the animated style of the Simpsons world represented life, and that death turned things more realistic. This was used in this episode. The picture of Bart's corpse was barely recognizable. They took full advantage of it not having to move, and made an almost photorealistic drawing of his dead body. Act 1 ended with the shot of Bart's corpse. When Act 2 started, Homer, Marge, and Lisa were sitting at their table crying. The crying went on and on. It got more pained and sounded more realistic, better acting than you would think possible. The animation started to decay even more as they cried, and you could hear murmuring in the background. This crying went on for all of Act 2. Act 3 opened with a title card saying 1 year had passed. Homer, Marge, and Lisa were skeletally thin and still sitting at the table. There was no sign of Maggie or the pets. They decided to visit Bart's grave. Springfield was completely deserted, and as they walked to the cemetery, the houses became more and more decrepit. They all looked abandoned. When they got to the grave, Bart's body was just lying in front of his tombstone, looking just like it did at the end of Act 1. The family started crying again. Eventually, they stopped and just stared at Bart's body. The camera zoomed in on Homer's face. According to summaries, Homer tells a joke at this part, but it isn't audible in the version I saw. You can't tell what Homer is saying. The view zoomed out as the episode came to a close. The tombstones in the background had the names of every Simpsons guest star on them. Some that no one had heard of in 1989, some that haven't been on the show yet. All of them had death dates on them. For guests who died since, like Michael Jackson and George Harrison, the dates were when they would die. You can try to use the tombstones to predict the death of living Simpsons guest stars, but there's something odd about most of the ones who haven't died yet. All of their deaths are listed on the same date.
Story 8. The Experiment.
In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he retained full muscular function. He could not see, hear, taste, smell, or even feel. He was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. About assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with a scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us." At this point, his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death.
Thanks for watching. Good night, sleep tight.